What happens when a broke journalist crashes Manhattan's most exclusive gala and accidentally spills champagne on America's most ruthless billionaire? Emma Parker's desperate lie about being engaged to Daniel Sterling was supposed to last 5 minutes. Instead, it becomes a year-long marriage contract that changes both their lives forever. Hey. Dignity Stories Z family, get ready for a tale full of romance, surprises, and all the feels. You don't want to miss this one. Let's dive in. The champagne glass shattered against the marble floor of the Metropolitan Museum like a gunshot through silk. Emma Parker watched in horror as Dom Perignon cascaded down the pristine white shirt of the most dangerous man in New York, each golden drop sealing what felt like her professional death warrant. Daniel Sterling didn't flinch. The heir to Sterling financial empire stood motionless as chaos erupted around them, his storm-gray eyes fixed on her face with the intensity of a predator studying prey. At 34, he was Forbes' most eligible bachelor and Manhattan's most untouchable force of nature. Emma had just made him very, very touchable. "I'm so sorry," she stammered, grabbing cocktail napkins with trembling fingers. "It was completely my fault. I wasn't looking where I was going." The Metropolitan Museum gala swirled around them in a blur of designer gowns and practiced smiles, but Emma felt like they existed in a vacuum of pure mortification. Her borrowed Valentino dress, held together by safety pins and prayer, suddenly felt more obvious than a neon sign announcing her as an imposter. "You don't belong here." Dan's voice cut through her panic like ice through water, quiet but absolute. Emma's blood turned to slush. She belonged here even less than he knew. 3 months behind on rent, surviving on ramen and stubbornness, she'd sweet-talked her way past security with forged credentials and a borrowed press pass. Her mission was simple: land an exclusive interview with Manhattan's elite for Metropolitan Weekly. What she hadn't planned on was literally crashing into the man who could destroy her with a single phone call. "Actually, I'm press," she said, lifting her chin with more confidence than she felt. "Emma Parker, freelance journalist. I was hoping to speak with some of the donors tonight about the museum's new conservation efforts." Something shifted in Dan's expression. Not softening exactly, but a flicker of interest, like a chess master recognizing an unexpected move. "Press." He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming in the way that only true power could be. "What publication sent you to cover Manhattan's most exclusive charity gala?" Emma's mouth went dry. Metropolitan Weekly was a small arts magazine that operated out of a cramped office in Queens. Their biggest story last month was a review of a community theater production of Cats, but something in Dan's tone suggested he already knew exactly who she was and why she was here. Then she felt. Freelance journalists don't typically receive invitations to events with $10,000 plates. Dan's eyes never left her face. "Which means you're either very well connected or very resourceful." "Given your obvious financial constraints, I'm betting on resourceful." Heat flooded Emma's cheeks. "I don't know what you mean. Your dress is a size too large. Your shoes are designer, but from at least 3 seasons ago. Your jewelry is costume. And you've been nursing the same glass of champagne for 20 minutes because you can't afford to get drunk at an event you crashed." His assessment was delivered, without cruelty, just clinical precision. "The question is, what do you want badly enough to risk criminal trespass charges?" Emma felt like a butterfly pinned to a board. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but she'd come too far to back down now. This was her chance, maybe her only chance, to prove she belonged in the world of serious journalism. "An interview," she said quietly. 5 minutes of your time to discuss Sterling Holdings' philanthropic initiatives. That's all I need." Don studied her for a long moment, and Emma could practically see the calculations running behind those gray eyes. The music seemed to fade, the crowd of glittering socialites blurred into background noise, and the weight of her entire future pressed down on her shoulders. 5 minutes, he said finally, "but not here, and not for free. I don't have money." "To pay you for an interview?" "Not talking about money, Miss Parker." Dan's smile was sharp enough to cut. "You want access to my world? Then you're going to help me solve a very expensive problem. Consider it a trade." Emma's pulse hammered against her throat. "What kind of problem? The kind that requires a wife?" The words hit her like a physical blow. A Around them, the gala continued its elegant dance of wealth and influence, but Emma felt like the floor had just dropped out from under her feet. "I'm sorry, what?" "My grandfather's will stipulates that I must be married by my 35th birthday to inherit full control of Sterling Holdings. That gives me exactly 8 months to find a suitable bride." Don's tone was matter-of-fact, like he was discussing quarterly projections. "The board has been pressuring me to choose from their pre-approved list of Manhattan princesses. I find that option limiting." Emma stared at him, wondering if the champagne had somehow affected her hearing. "You're asking me to marry you? I'm offering you a business proposition? 12 months as Mrs. Sterling, full access to my world, my connections, my resources. In return, you help me secure my inheritance and gain complete editorial control over Sterling Media Group's journalism division." The magnitude of what he was suggesting made Emma's head spin. Sterling Media Group owned half the major publications in New York. Control over their journalism division would mean the power to shape narratives, break stories, change the entire landscape of media. "You're insane," she whispered. "I'm practical. I need credibility and resources. I need a wife who won't fall in love with me or expect this arrangement to be anything more than what it is." Don stepped closer, and Emma caught the scent of his cologne, expensive and intoxicating. "The alternative is that I call security right now and have you arrested for trespassing." "Your choice, Miss Parker?" Emma's mind raced. This was crazy, completely, utterly insane. But it was also the opportunity of a lifetime, wrapped in the most dangerous package imaginable. "Why me?" she asked. "You could have any woman in this room. Because any woman in this room would expect me to fall in love with her. You know better." Dan's eyes were unreadable steel. "You understand that some things are purely transactional. That makes you either very smart or very damaged. Either way, it makes you perfect for what I need." The brutal honesty of his words should have offended her. Instead, Emma found herself oddly impressed by his directness. No pretty lies, no false promises. Just the cold, hard truth laid out like a contract. And after 12 months, clean. Divorce. Generous settlement. And a recommendation letter that will open any door in journalism you want opened. Dan extended his hand. "Do we have a deal, Mrs. Sterling?" Emma stared at his outstretched hand like it was a loaded weapon. Everything rational in her brain screamed that this was the worst idea in the history of bad ideas. But the desperate, a hungry part of her that had been fighting for recognition. Her entire life whispered that this might be her only shot at the kind of success she'd dreamed about. She thought of her empty refrigerator, her overdue rent notices, the constant rejection letters from every major publication in the city. Then she thought of the power Dan was offering her, the chance to matter, to make a difference. Emma took his hand, as Sterling it is. 3 days later, Emma sat in the leather passenger seat of Dan's Bentley, watching Manhattan blur past the tinted windows like a fever dream. The marriage certificate in her purse felt heavier than the engagement ring on her finger, a flawless, 2-carat diamond that probably cost more than she'd earned in the past 5 years. "You're having second thoughts." Dan's voice cut through her spiraling anxiety. "I'm having all the thoughts," Emma admitted, turning to study his profile. Even in the dim light of the car's interior, he was devastatingly handsome in a way that felt almost weaponized. "This whole thing feels surreal. 3 days ago, I was eating cereal for dinner. Now I'm married to a billionaire? Having regrets? No." The word came out more forcefully than she'd intended. "Just trying to process the fact that my life completely changed in the span of a handshake." Dan's lips curved into something that might have been a smile. "Welcome to my world, Mrs. Sterling. Everything moves fast here. You adapt, or you get crushed." The Bentley pulled up to Sterling Tower, its glass facade stretching into the cloudy November sky, like a monument to modern power. Emma had been here twice since their arrangement began, once for the hastily arranged ceremony in Dan's private office, witnessed only by his lawyer and Patricia Hayes, and once for what Dan had called wardrobe consultation, but which felt more like a complete identity makeover. "Ready for your first board meeting?" Don asked as they stepped into the elevator. Emma's stomach clenched. I thought I was just observing. Plans change. Richard Morrison, our largest shareholder, requested to meet my new wife personally. He's old-fashioned about these things. Dan straightened his tie, the motion casual but somehow predatory. He's also the deciding vote on whether I maintain control of the company's media acquisitions. The elevator doors opened to reveal the 52nd floor conference room, where a dozen of New York's most powerful men and women sat around a table that probably cost more than Emma's former apartment. Every face turned toward them as they entered, expressions ranging from curious to openly hostile. Gentlemen, ladies, Dan said, his hand settling possessively on the small of Emma's back. I'd like you to meet my wife, Emma Sterling. The introductions blurred together in a haze of firm handshakes and calculating stares. Emma smiled and nodded at the right moments. Grateful for the crash course in corporate etiquette Patricia had given her that morning, but she could feel the undercurrent of skepticism in the room. The unspoken questions about her background, her motivations, her worthiness to sit at this table. Mrs. Sterling, Richard Morrison's voice boomed from the head of the table, was older than the others, with silver hair and eyes like a hawk. I understand you come from the journalism world. It's how fascinating and how convenient, given our recent acquisition of Metropolitan Weekly. Emma's blood turned to ice water. She felt Dan go rigid beside her, though his expression never changed. I wasn't aware Sterling Holdings had acquired Metropolitan Weekly, Emma said carefully. Oh yes, Morrison continued, his smile sharp enough to draw blood. We finalized the purchase yesterday. It's quite a coincidence, wouldn't you say? Your husband buying the very publication you've been writing for? The room fell silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. Emma could feel every pair of eyes on her, waiting for her reaction. This wasn't mentioned in their contract. This wasn't part of the deal. I should clarify, Emma said, her voice steadier than she felt. I'm freelance. I've submitted pieces to Metropolitan Weekly, but I'm not an employee. Nevertheless, Morrison leaned back in his chair. It raises questions about the timing of your marriage. Some might wonder if this union is more about business strategy than romance. Some might. Dan's voice cut through the tension like a blade. But those people would be making assumptions about my personal life that I find both inappropriate and irrelevant to our business here today. The warning in Dan's tone was unmistakable, but Morrison seemed unfazed. Of course, my apologies. I'm sure your marriage is built on nothing but mutual affection and respect. Emma wanted to disappear into the floor. She could feel the trap closing around them, the careful manipulation of a man who suspected exactly what their arrangement was, and was testing to see how far he could push. Our marriage, Emma said quietly, is built on partnership, mutual respect, and the understanding that some bonds transcend simple categorization. She felt Dan's surprise in the subtle shift of his posture, but she pressed on. I may not have been born into this world, Mr. Morrison, but I understand it. I understand power, ambition, and the prices we pay for both, and I understand that. Questioning the authenticity of someone's marriage in a corporate boardroom says more about the questioner than the questioned. The silence that followed felt electric. Morrison's eyes narrowed, but there was something like respect in his expression now. Well said, Mrs. Sterling. I look forward to seeing what other insights you bring to our organization.
Oh.
The meeting continued, but Emma barely heard the financial reports and acquisition discussions. Her mind was reeling from Dan's betrayal. He'd bought Metropolitan Weekly without telling her, effectively purchasing her professional independence along with her personal freedom. 2 hours later, they were back in the Bentley, the city sliding past in shades of gray and gold. You bought my magazine, Emma said, her voice flat. I bought a small arts publication that was 3 months from bankruptcy. Dan didn't look at her. You're welcome. That's not the point, and you know it. Then what is the point, Emma? She turned to face him fully, anger burning bright in her chest. The point is that you made me dependent on you in ways that weren't in our contract. The point is that you've effectively eliminated my ability to work independently. I've given you access to resources you never could have imagined. You've made me your employee. Dan finally looked at her, and the intensity in his gray eyes made her breath catch. You were already my employee the moment you signed that marriage certificate. The only difference is that now you have a platform that reaches more than a few hundred Brooklyn hipsters." Emma stared at him, seeing him clearly for the first time since this insane arrangement began. Daniel Sterling wasn't offering her partnership. He was offering her a very beautiful, very expensive cage. "Stop the car," she said quietly. Emma stopped the car, Dan. Now. The Bentley pulled over to the curb. Emma's hand was on the door handle when Dan's fingers closed around her wrist. "Don't," he said, and for the first time since she'd known him, his voice held something other than cold control. "Don't walk away from this. Give me one good reason why I shouldn't." Dan was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing circles on the inside of her wrist, in a gesture so unexpectedly intimate that it made her shiver. "Because," he said finally, "you're the first person in 10 years who's called me on my shit, and made me respect you more for it." Emma felt something shift between them, a crack in the careful walls they'd both built around this arrangement. It was dangerous territory, this hint of something real beneath the contract and calculation. "That's not enough," she whispered, but she didn't pull her hand away. "Then let me give you something else." Dan's eyes were storm-dark in the dim light of the car. "Morrison was testing us today. If he'd sensed weakness, if he'd believed for 1 second that our marriage was purely transactional, he would have blocked every media acquisition, Sterling Holdings attempts for the next 5 years. You saved us both today, so maybe this partnership is more equal than either of us realized." Dan's fingers tightened on her wrist. "Stay, Emma. Not because of the contract or the money or the access, because I think we might actually be good at this." Emma looked into his eyes and saw something she hadn't expected. Vulnerability. Need. The carefully controlled. Daniel Sterling was asking her to stay, and for the first time, it felt like he meant it as more than just a business proposition. But as she sat there, feeling the warmth of his touch and the pull of something deeper than their arrangement, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that she was falling into quicksand. Beautiful, seductive quicksand that might just swallow her whole. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll stay." The relief in Dan's eyes was so profound it took her breath away. But as they drove toward his penthouse apartment, Emma couldn't ignore the voice in her head whispering that she'd just made the most dangerous decision of her life. The nightmare started 3 weeks into their arrangement. Emma woke, gasping in the guest bedroom of Dan's penthouse, her heart hammering against her ribs as the remnants of her dream dissolved into shadow. The same dream. Always the same one. The screech of tires on wet asphalt. The taste of blood. The sound of her sister's voice, cut short by silence. She pulled on a robe and padded barefoot through the apartment, drawn by the soft glow of light. Coming from Dan's home office, through the cracked door, she could see him hunched over his desk, still in his dress shirt from the charity dinner they'd attended earlier. Sleeves rolled up and tie discarded somewhere in the darkness. "Can't sleep either?" she asked softly. Dan looked up, and in the harsh light of his computer screen, she could see the exhaustion etched into his features. "I don't sleep much anymore. Haven't for years." Emma hesitated in the doorway. Their living arrangement had been carefully choreographed to maintain distance. Separate bedrooms, separate schedules, interactions limited to public appearances, and necessary business discussions. But something about the late hour and the vulnerability in his voice made her step into the room. "What are you working on at 2 in the morning?" "Damage control." Don gestured to the screen, which showed a cascade of financial projections and legal documents. "Morrison's been busy since our board meeting. He's questioning every media acquisition, demanding reviews of editorial independence policies. Knows exactly what he's doing." Emma moved closer, studying the documents over his shoulder. The numbers were staggering. Billions of dollars hanging in the balance of corporate politics and power plays she was only beginning to understand. "He suspects our marriage is fake," she said. "He suspects a lot of things. Some of them are even true." Don leaned back in his chair, and Emma was struck by how young he looked with his guard down. Younger and infinitely more tired. "The question is whether he can prove any of it before the inheritance deadline. And if he can, then I lose everything. Sterling Holdings gets carved up and sold to the highest bidders. 40,000 employees lose their jobs. and Morrison adds another trophy to his collection of dismantled empires. The weight of what Dan was carrying hit Emma like a physical blow. She'd been so focused on her own fears and doubts that she hadn't fully grasped the scope of what was at stake for him. Why didn't you tell me how bad it was? Dan turned to look at her, his gray eyes unreadable in the blue glow of the monitor. Because it's not your problem to solve. You're fulfilling your part of the contract. The rest is on me? That's not how partnerships work, Dan. Is that what we are? Partners? The question hung between them like a challenge. Emma realized she was standing close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body, close enough to see the faint scar. That ran along his jawline, a detail she'd never noticed before. I don't know what we are, she admitted. I'm not sure you do either. Dan was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming against his desk in a rhythm that spoke a barely contained energy. I was supposed to be married 3 years ago, he said finally, Victoria Ashford. Perfect breeding, perfect connections, perfect willingness to overlook my flaws in exchange for the sterling name. Emma felt a stab of something that might have been jealousy. What happened? She died in a car accident 2 weeks before the wedding. Dan's voice was carefully neutral, but Emma could hear the pain beneath the surface. Drunk driver ran a red light. She was coming back from her bachelorette party. Dan, I'm so sorry. Don't be. I didn't love her. I turned back to the computer screen. I barely knew her, but she was supposed to solve this problem for me. And her death left me with a grandfather's will I couldn't fulfill, and a board of directors who think I'm too unstable to run a media empire. Emma's throat tightened. Is that why you chose me? Because I remind you of her? No. Dan's answer was immediate and fierce. I chose you because you're nothing like her. Victoria would have smiled and nodded and played the perfect corporate wife until the day she died. You asked me why I bought Metropolitan Weekly, and you called me on my manipulation. You made me realize that maybe honesty isn't as overrated as I thought. The raw sincerity in his voice made Emma's chest ache. Without thinking, she reached out and touched his shoulder. Feeling the tension in his muscles beneath the expensive fabric of his shirt, the nightmares, Dan said quietly. You have them too. It wasn't a question. I realized he must have heard her waking up, gasping. Must have noticed the dark circles under her eyes the concealer couldn't quite hide. My sister, she whispered. Car accident when I was 19. I was driving. Ow. Dan turned in his chair to face her fully, and the understanding in his eyes nearly undid her. It wasn't your fault. Everyone says that. The police, the therapists, my parents. But she was in the car because of me. Because I needed a ride to a job interview that I thought was so important I couldn't take the subway. Emma's voice cracked. She died for a minimum wage position at a magazine that folded 6 months later. Emma, she was going to be a doctor. Brilliant, beautiful, everything I'm not. And she died because I was too proud to ask for subway fare. The silence that followed felt heavy with shared grief. Dan stood slowly, and for a moment Emma thought he was going to walk away, to retreat behind the walls of professional distance they'd maintained so carefully. Instead, he pulled her into his arms. It wasn't romantic or sexual. It was purely human, the comfort of one broken person recognizing another. Emma buried her face against his chest and let herself cry for the first time in months, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against her cheek. She would have been proud of you, Dan said softly, his hand stroking her hair. What you've built, what you've survived. She would have been proud. Emma pulled back to look at him, and the tenderness in his expression made her breath catch. This wasn't the cold, calculating billionaire she'd married. This was someone real, someone damaged and healing, and maybe just as lost as she was. Dan, she whispered, and she wasn't sure what she was asking for, but he seemed to understand. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. And for one suspended moment, Emma thought he was going to kiss her, the air between them crackled with possibility, with the promise of something that could destroy them both. Then his phone rang. Don stepped back like he'd been burned, the spell broken as brutally as if someone had doused them with ice water. He grabbed the phone with shaking hands. Sterling. His voice was already shifting back to business mode, but Emma could see the cost in the tight lines around his eyes. She couldn't hear the voice on the other end, but she watched Dan's face go pale. "When?" he asked. "Then, how bad?" He ended the call and turned to Emma, and she could see that whatever fragile connection they'd just discovered was about to be tested. That was Patricia. "Someone leaked photos of you from before our marriage. Your real apartment, your financial records, documentation of your fake press credentials from the gala." Dan's voice was carefully controlled, but Emma could hear the fury beneath. "Morrison's calling an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning." Emma felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. How was that possible? How did anyone get access to? She stopped, the pieces clicking into place with sickening clarity. Only one person had access to her old apartment, her financial information. Her desperate attempts to break into Manhattan's social scene. "My friend Sarah," she whispered. "She's the only one who knew about the forged credentials. She helped me get ready for the gala." How much did she know about our arrangement? Nothing specific, but Emma's stomach churned as she remembered. Their conversation 3 days ago, Sarah asking pointed questions about the sudden marriage, about Dan's motives, about whether Emma was in over her head. She knew something was off. And she's been struggling financially. If someone offered her enough money, Dan's face was stone. Then we have a problem. Morrison now has proof that our marriage began with deception. He can argue that the entire arrangement is fraudulent. Emma sank into the chair across from his desk, the weight of her mistake crushing down on her. "I've ruined everything." "No." Dan's voice was firm. "We've been outmaneuvered, but we're not beaten. Not yet." Moved to the window, looking out at the city lights below. And when he spoke again, his voice held a determination that made Emma's pulse quicken. "There's one way to neutralize Morrison's attack. One way to prove that our marriage is real enough to satisfy even the most suspicious board member." "How?" Don turned back to her, and the look in his eyes made her heart stop. "We make it real, Emma, in every way that matters." The board meeting felt like a public execution. Emma sat beside Dan at the polished conference table, her hands folded carefully in her lap to hide their trembling. Around them, 12 of New York's most powerful executives waited with the patience of vultures circling prey. Richard Morrison sat at the head of the table like a king holding court. The leaked photographs spread before him like evidence in a murder trial. "These images," Morrison said, his voice carrying the weight of theatrical disappointment, "paint a rather different picture than the one we've been presented with, don't they?" Emma stared at the photos of her old studio apartment. Space looked even more pathetic, blown up to presentation size. Her thrift store furniture, her empty refrigerator, the stack of overdue bills on her kitchen counter. All of it laid bare for Manhattan's elite to judge. "They show a woman who was struggling financially," Don said, his voice steady as granite. "Many people struggle before they find success. I hardly see how my wife's previous circumstances reflect on her character or our marriage. Come now, Daniel." Morrison's smile was sharp as a blade. "This woman crashed a $10,000 a plate charity gala using forged credentials. She posed as legitimate press to gain access to an exclusive event. And within hours of meeting you, she became your fiancé. You have to admit the timeline raises questions." Emma felt every pair of eyes in the room boring into her. The shame was overwhelming, but beneath it burned a fierce anger. These people, with their inherited wealth and carefully orchestrated lives, were judging her for doing whatever it took to survive. "The timeline," Emma said quietly, "reflects to people who recognized something in each other that transcended conventional courtship." "How romantic." Morrison leaned back in his chair. "How convenient. Tell me, Mrs. Sterling, what exactly did you recognize in your husband that inspired such instant devotion?" The question was a trap, designed to make her stumble over corporate speak or romantic cliches. But as Emma looked at Dan, she realized she knew the answer. She'd known it since that night in his office, when they'd shared their grief in the darkness. "I recognized someone who carries the weight of other people's expectations without complaint," she said. "Someone who built an empire not for personal glory, but because 40,000 families depend on the decisions he makes every day." Someone who's been alone for so long, he's forgotten that strength doesn't always mean isolation. The room fell silent. Emma could feel Dan's surprise in the subtle shift of his posture, but she pressed on. You want to know what I saw in Daniel? Sterling. I saw someone who needed a partner, not a trophy wife. Someone who deserved to be seen for who he really is, not just what he represents. Morrison's eyes narrowed. Very touching. But sentiment doesn't change facts. These documents they show that I was desperate, Emma interrupted. They show that I made questionable choices because I was fighting for my professional survival. They don't show fraud, Mr. Morrison. They show human frailty. They show a gold digger who enough. Don's voice cut through Morrison's attack like a sword through silk. He stood, and the power that radiated from him filled the room like electricity. Before a storm, this board exists to oversee the financial health of Sterling Holdings. It does not exist to litigate my personal relationships or to humiliate my wife with tabloid gossip. Your grandfather's will requires that I be married. By my 35th birthday, I am married. To a woman I respect, admire, and care for deeply. The circumstances of how Emma and I met are irrelevant to the legal requirements of my inheritance. Emma's heart clenched at the raw honesty in Dan's voice, but Morrison wasn't finished. There's one more document I think the board should see. Morrison slid a manila folder across the table. A prenuptial agreement that details the exact terms of your marriage, including the 12-month time limit and the $5 million payment upon completion of Mrs. Sterling's services. The silence that followed was deafening. Emma stared at the folder like it contained a venomous snake. That document was supposed to be sealed, known only to Dan's lawyer and herself. Oh, where did you get this? Dan's voice was deadly quiet. From someone who felt the board deserved to know the truth about Sterling Holdings' future leadership. Morrison's smile was triumphant. Someone close enough to your inner circle to have access to your most confidential documents. Raced. Only 3 people had access to that prenup. Dan's lawyer, herself, and Patricia. The name fell from Emma's lips like a stone into still water. Dan's face went white. Patricia Hayes, his executive assistant for 7 years. The woman who managed his schedule, his communications, his most sensitive business. The woman Emma had trusted, confided in, even begun to consider a friend. Why? Emma whispered. Morrison answered instead of Patricia, who had remained conspicuously absent from the meeting. Ms. Hayes has been keeping me informed of your husband's activities for the past 2 years. Insurance, you might say, against the day when Daniel's judgment might prove compromised. The betrayal hit Emma like a physical blow. Patricia had been there for every moment of their arrangement. She'd helped with Emma's wardrobe, coached her on corporate etiquette, even offered seemingly genuine friendship during the long days of adjustment to her new life. She's been spying on me, Dan said, the words coming out flat and emotionless. For 2 years, she's been protecting the interests of Sterling Holdings shareholders, Morrison corrected. And her diligence has revealed that your marriage is nothing more than an elaborate fraud designed to circumvent your grandfather's will. Emma watched Dan's face as the full scope of the betrayal sank in. Patricia hadn't just leaked information. She'd systematically documented every private moment, every vulnerable confession, every crack in the armor of their carefully constructed arrangement. This meeting is over, Dan said. Morrison gestured to the other board members. We're calling for a vote of no confidence. If you cannot produce legitimate proof that your marriage is genuine, we'll recommend that the probate court invalidate your grandfather's will. Coma felt the walls closing in around them. Everything they'd built, every moment of connection they'd discovered was about to be destroyed by legal technicalities and corporate politics. You want proof our marriage is real? Emma stood, her voice carrying across the room with fierce determination. Then you'll have it. She turned to Don, her heart hammering against her ribs, and did the one thing that could save them both. The one thing that would make their arrangement irreversibly real. I'm pregnant. The lie fell into the silence like a bomb. Emma saw shock flicker across Dan's face before his expression hardened into unreadable stone. Around the table board, members shifted uncomfortably, the balance of power suddenly uncertain. Pregnant, Morrison repeated, his voice carefully neutral. 8 weeks, Emma continued, the fabrication flowing from her lips with desperate conviction. We wanted to wait until the first trimester was complete before making any announcements. But given the circumstances, she let the implication hang in the air. A pregnancy would complicate any divorce proceedings, would create legal complications that even Morrison's machinations couldn't easily navigate. Congratulations, Morrison said finally, but his eyes promised that this wasn't over. I suppose. That does change things. The meeting dissolved into uncomfortable small talk and strategic retreats. Emma maintained her composure until the conference room emptied, leaving her alone with Dawn and the weight of what she'd just done. Pregnant, Dan said quietly. It was the only thing I could think of that would buy us time. Time for what, Emma? Time to figure out how to fake a pregnancy for the next 8 months. Time to dig ourselves deeper into this lie. Emma turned to face him, and the cold fury in his eyes made her step back. I was trying to save us. You were trying to save yourself. Dan's voice was ice and broken glass, just like you've been doing since the moment we met. Every decision, every choice, every moment of supposed honesty has been calculated to protect Emma Parker? That's not true, isn't it? You've crashed the gala for your own career. You agreed to marry me for your own financial gain? You lied about Sarah's betrayal until it was too late to matter? And now, you've trapped us both in a lie that could destroy everything I've worked for. Each word hit Emma like a physical blow. I thought you trusted me. Trust. Dan laughed, the sound bitter and harsh. I trusted Patricia for 7 years. I trusted Victoria to show up to our wedding. I trusted my grandfather to leave me a company instead of a series of impossible hoops to jump through. Trust is a luxury I can't afford, Emma, and apparently neither can you. Emma felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. So what now? You divorce me and lose everything. You let Morrison win because you can't stand the thought of being tied to someone beneath your social status. Status. Dan's voice rose for the first time since she'd known him. You think this is about money or breeding or whatever classist bullshit you've built up in your head? This is about the fact that I opened myself up to you, and you responded by making the most important decision of both our lives without consulting me. I was protecting us. You were protecting yourself, just like you always do. Just like everyone always does. Dan moved toward the window, his shoulders rigid with tension. Patricia betrayed me for money. Morrison's trying to destroy me for power. You've trapped me in a lie for your own survival. The only difference is that I was stupid enough to think you might be different. The words hung between them like a chasm too wide to cross. Emma realized that somewhere in the past few weeks their arrangement had become something else entirely. Something real and fragile and infinitely more dangerous than either of them had anticipated. Dan, she whispered, but he held up a hand to stop her. The pregnancy lie buys us maybe 2 months before people start asking questions. Medical appointments, baby preparations, the kind of intimate details that Morrison will scrutinize like a forensic accountant. Dan's voice was calm again, but Emma could hear the exhaustion beneath. We'll need to maintain the charade publicly while finding another solution privately. What kind of solution? Dan turned back to her, and the look in his eyes made her stomach drop. The kind where one of us sacrifices everything so the other can survive. Emma stared at him, seeing the calculation behind his words, the cold strategic. Thinking that had made him a billionaire before you're going to throw me under the bus. I'm going to do whatever it takes to protect 40,000 jobs and the company my family built over 3 generations. Dan's voice was matter-of-fact, as if he were discussing quarterly projections. If that means publicly discrediting our marriage and painting you as a gold digger who manipulated me, then that's what I'll do. The betrayal was so complete, so unexpected, that Emma actually laughed. You're just like them, aren't you? Just like Morrison and Patricia and all the rest? When things get complicated, you throw away the people who trusted you. Trust is earned. Emma, and you lost mine the moment you made that pregnancy announcement without consulting me? Emma nodded slowly, feeling something inside her chest crystallize into cold, hard resolve. Then I guess we understand each other perfectly. She walked toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, Dan, I wasn't trying to protect myself. In that room, I was trying to protect you. Because despite everything, despite the contract and the lies and the manipulation, I actually cared about what happened to you. She turned back to look at him one last time. You're right about one thing. Trust is earned. And you just proved you never deserved mine. Emma walked out of Sterling Tower and into the gray December afternoon, knowing that she'd just lost. The only man who had ever seen her as more than a collection of mistakes and desperate choices. What she didn't know was that, in 48 hours, she would discover that her lie about being pregnant wasn't a lie at all. Emma stared at the pregnancy test in her hands, watching the second pink line appear like a ghost materializing from nothing. The irony was so perfect it felt like the universe laughing at her expense. 2 days after lying about being pregnant, to save a marriage that had just imploded, she discovered she actually was. 8 weeks, just like she'd told the board. The timeline matched exactly with the night she and Dan had almost kissed in his office. When the grief and loneliness had pulled them together in a moment of desperate human connection that had gone further than either of them admitted, her phone buzzed with another call from Patricia, who had been trying to reach her since news of the board meeting leaked to the press. Emma let it go to voicemail like she had the previous 15 calls. There was nothing Patricia could say that would explain away 7 years of systematic betrayal. The doorbell of her Brooklyn apartment rang, and Emma's heart lurched. She'd been hiding here for 3 days, avoiding the paparazzi camped outside. Sterling Tower and the reporters who somehow had her old address, but when she looked through the peephole, it wasn't a journalist standing in her hallway. It was Dan. He looked like he hadn't slept since their confrontation. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled, and there was something hollow in his eyes that made Emma's chest ache despite everything. "We need to talk," he said when she opened the door. "I think we've said enough." "Emma, please." The word sounded foreign coming from Daniel Sterling's mouth. 5 minutes, then I'll leave and never bother you again if that's what you want." Emma stepped aside to let him in, and Dan's presence immediately made her small apartment feel even smaller. He looked around at the space she'd returned to after leaving his penthouse, taking in the thrift store furniture and secondhand books with an expression she couldn't read. "Morrison's calling for a shareholder vote," Don said without preamble. "He's convinced half the board that our marriage is fraudulent. If the vote goes against me, I'll lose control of Sterling Holdings within the month, so sacrifice me publicly. Like you planned. Paint me as the gold digger who manipulated you." Emma's voice was steadier than she felt. "Problem solved. Can't do that. Why not? It's the logical, strategic choice. Cut your losses, move on." Dan ran a hand through his hair, and Emma caught a glimpse of the vulnerable man she'd held in his office that night when they'd shared their grief. "Because it would be a lie," he said quietly, "and I've told enough lies about us to last a lifetime." Emma felt something crack inside her chest. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that somewhere between the board meetings and the public appearances and the carefully orchestrated charade, this stopped being fake for me." Dan's eyes met hers. "I'm saying that I fell in love with my fake wife and I don't know how to unfeel it." The words hit Emma like a physical blow. She gripped the back of her couch to keep herself steady. "You have terrible timing," she whispered. I know I hurt you. I know I chose strategy over trust when you needed me to choose you. But Emma, what you did in that boardroom, the way you protected me even when you knew it might destroy. I'm pregnant." The words tumbled out before Emma could stop them. Dan froze, his declaration of love hanging unfinished in the air between them. "What?" Emma pulled the pregnancy test from her pocket and held it out to him. 8 weeks, just like I told Morrison. Apparently my lie was actually the truth. Dan stared at the test, like it might bite him. How is that possible? Well, when two people who are married share a moment of grief and comfort and human connection, sometimes biology takes over. Emma's voice was sharper than she intended. "You figure out the timeline?" Dan sat down heavily on her couch, the test still in his hands. "The night in my office, the night you almost kissed me, and then didn't. Because you were too scared to let yourself want something real. Emma, this changes everything, doesn't it?" Emma moved to the window, looking out at the street where photographers were still lurking with telephoto lenses. "Now, you can't throw me to the wolves without looking like the kind of man who abandons his pregnant wife. Morrison's lost his best weapon. Is that what you think this is about? Corporate strategy?" Emma turned back to him, and the raw pain in his expression made her breath catch. "I don't know what this is about, Dan. I thought I did. Then you accused me of being just like everyone else who's betrayed you, so tell me, what is this about?" Don stood and walked to her, stopping close enough that she could see the exhaustion and regret etched into every line of his face. "It's about the fact that I'm in love with you, and I'm terrified that you only stayed because of the contract." His voice was barely above a whisper. "It's about the fact that I've never trusted anyone the way I trusted you. And when you made that pregnancy announcement without consulting me, it felt like you'd chosen strategy over partnership, just like everyone else in my life."
No.
"So you decided to hurt me before I could hurt you?" "Yes." The admission came out broken and raw. "And it was the stupidest thing I've ever done," which is saying something because I once tried to acquire a company by buying it with its own money. Despite everything, Emma felt her lips twitch toward a smile. "That does sound pretty stupid, Emma." Dan reached for her hands, and she let him take them. "I know I don't deserve it. I know I proved that I'm just as damaged and scared as everyone else who's let you down. But if you'll have me, if you'll forgive me, I want to be your partner. Not because of the inheritance or the company or the contract, because I love you." Looked into his eyes and saw the truth of it written there. Love and fear and desperate hope all tangled together in an expression that was purely, vulnerably human. "The company," she said. "If we do this, if we make this real, Morrison will still try to destroy you. He'll claim the pregnancy is just another manipulation. Let him try." Dan's grip on her hands tightened. "I'd rather lose Sterling Holdings fighting for something real than keep it by living a lie. Dan, you'd be giving up everything. Your inheritance, your grandfather's legacy, 40,000 jobs. I'd be choosing love over fear. I'd be choosing trust over strategy. I'd be choosing the woman I want to spend my life with over the empire I inherited." Dan's voice grew stronger with each word. "That's not giving up everything, Emma. That's gaining everything that actually matters." Emma felt tears sliding down her cheeks. "You sure know how to make a girl feel special, Sterling." "It is that a yes?" Emma thought about her sister, about the dreams that had died in twisted metal and broken glass. She thought about the scared, desperate woman who had crashed a charity gala with forged credentials and borrowed courage. She thought about the man standing in front of her, offering to sacrifice an empire for the chance at something real. "Ask me again," she said. Don dropped to one knee right there in her cramped Brooklyn apartment. Holding her hands in his while tears tracked down his face. "Emma Parker Sterling, will you marry me? Not for a contract or an inheritance or a business arrangement. Will you marry me because I love you and I want to build a life with you? I promise to choose trust over fear every single day for the rest of our lives?" "Yes," Emma whispered, pulling him to his feet and into her arms. "Yes, Don, I'll marry you." They held each other in the afternoon light streaming through her small windows. And Emma realized that sometimes the most precious things in life came disguised as the most dangerous choices. 6 months later, Emma stood in the nursery of their new apartment, hanging pictures on the wall while Dan assembled a crib with the intense concentration usually reserved for hostile takeovers. The apartment was smaller than his penthouse, but it was theirs in a way the penthouse had never been. "You know," Emma said, watching him wrestle with the instruction manual, "most billionaires would have hired someone to do that." "Most billionaires didn't give up their companies to marry the love of their lives," Don replied, not looking up from the bewildering array of screws and wooden panels. It had taken Morrison 3 months to complete the hostile takeover of Sterling Holdings. Dan had fought him every step of the way, not to keep the company, but to ensure that the employees were protected in the transition. In the end, most of them had kept their jobs, and Dan had walked away with his integrity intact and Emma by his side. "Any regrets?" Emma asked, settling into the rocking chair they'd bought at a second-hand store in Queens. Dan looked up from the crib, his eyes finding hers across the sun-filled room. "About giving up billions of dollars to marry a woman who makes me laugh every day and challenges me to be better than I thought I could be." He pretended to consider it. "Ask me again when I'm trying to change diapers at 3 in the morning." Emma laughed, her hand resting on the curve of her belly where their daughter was growing strong and healthy. "I love you, Dan Sterling." Love you too, Emma Sterling. More than empires. It's more than inheritances. More than anything I ever thought I wanted. Outside their window, New York City hummed with the energy of 8 million dreams and ambitions. But inside their small apartment, the afternoon light painting everything golden and the promise of their future taking shape in carefully assembled pieces, Emma had everything she'd ever really needed. A partnership built on trust, a love worth any sacrifice, and the knowledge that sometimes the most beautiful things in life began with the most terrifying choices. Asterisk, asterisk, comment below. Which moment hit you hardest? When Emma lied about being pregnant, or when Dan chose love over his empire? Let me know your thoughts. Subscribe for more emotionally intense romance stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. The end.